Morning, everyone. Happy Mondays, especially if you're in the south of France, like Ben there, looks like. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the man we've come to know as DG7, Mirror Deputy Political Editor, Ben Glaze. Now, we're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day. We want you to ask us your questions, dig into the comments, tell us what's on your mind, and we're going to answer as many of them as we can. Please don't be too mad. We know that there's going to be trolls today because we've got stuff about lockdown, but, we'll deal with 1 or 2 wingnuts, but we're not going to have too many wingnuts. I'm not in the mood. So, what have we got today? Well, Ben's got the splash, everybody. Whee! The Mirror front page is reporting on these increasingly insistent tips and briefings and hints that the June 21st so-called Freedom Day will be delayed by a month. Now, the increase in the Delta variant, the unknowns around what effect that has on the unvaccinated or the partially vaccinated in terms of hospital admissions and deaths means the Prime Minister is going to announce later today that it's on hold. Now, Ben, it looks to me, call me a cynic, that the number 10 nudge unit has been working overtime on this for the past week or 10 days, ensuring the population softened up nicely with lots of briefings trickling out, getting people ready for the disappointment. But in fact, it seems to be working because surveys show more than half of us are fine with keeping restrictions a bit longer. But the scientists have been warning us for months, so they have left it a bit late. What's going on? What's the thinking in number 10? What are they up to?
Right, so when the government set out its roadmap for unlocking earlier this year, it's put through step 1, 2, 3, 4, and step 4 was always going to be the last one to be triggered, and it gave not before dates, those provisional dates, which would be the absolute earliest that that particular stage would be triggered. Step 4 has always been penciled in for June the 21st, but as you say, over the past few weeks, it's become less and less likely that it will go ahead on June the 21st, which is obviously only a week today. That's because of the rising numbers of cases of the Indian variant of coronavirus, which now the World Health Organization has called it the Delta variant. There's an average of 7,000 cases a day. It's a lot more than we've been having. It's up around about half in the course of a week. And the hospital admissions are also starting to rise. Now, what's key to deciding whether or not they go ahead on June 21st, which we now know they won't. But what was key to it is whether or not hospital admissions continue to go up. Basically, the accepted cases are going to rise because with the stage 3 unlocking, we've all been going out more, we've been spending more time with each other, we're allowed to see each other indoors more, you can go and have dinner with more people. So it was built in that cases would go up. They were fine with that, but it was whether it translated to a rise in the number of hospital admissions. It appears that is happening. So what we think the government are going to do is at about 6 o'clock this evening, Boris Johnson's going to hold another number 10 press conference, and he's going to announce a delay of up to 4 weeks for triggering step 4. And that will buy the government time to inoculate more people through the vaccine program. So they reckon about 10 more people will be able to receive their second dose. And the evidence shows that the second dose is much more important. It was always important for any variant of coronavirus, but it's much more important for the Indian variant because the Indian variant is about 60% more transmissible than the Kent variant, which of course blew up in Britain at the very end of last year, the autumn and into winter, and that was behind the huge spike in cases we had in January and February. So yeah, we think around about 6 o'clock this evening, the Prime Minister will say that the triggering of step 4 is being delayed.
And as we've just seen some of the comments there, I don't know how indicative they are, but there are people who are fine with the idea of having some more restrictions if that's what's needed, and 1 or 2 who can't. Now, Claire says we can't be reactive. We need to be proactive this time with the Delta variant. Can we just call it the Boris Johnson variant? Because he's the one who let it in. And he's got to announce a continuing restrictions tonight. It's his own damn fault, isn't it?
The surveys consistently show that the public is more wary of opening up than the government ever believed it would be. Like number 10, when they imposed the very first lockdown back in March last year, people in Downing Street were worried about how it would go down because you're taking away, the ancient British right to go down the pub. They didn't think that people, basically, they've been so successful in frightening people that people didn't want to go out anyway. Like in the week or so before it was pubs shut, people had sort of stopped going themselves anyway because they didn't want to get this virus because they've been watching the TV, reading their newspapers, seeing what was happening as the coronavirus sort of swept the world, really. So they were surprised with how well people adapted to lockdown. Lots of people genuinely liked lockdown. Others were just far too frightened to go outside. So yeah, the polls still show that people want their government to be cautious. There's a poll over the weekend, an opinion survey in the Observer, which showed I think it was 54% of people support delaying a lockdown. So more than half want the government not to let the public to do more things. They want to be stopped.
Yeah, it seems to be. I don't know. Some people, a cynic would say, people have just got too used to being told what to do and they don't want to do anything else. But then, like Susan says there, this what it takes to get back to, most people are sensible. Most people are reasonable human beings, especially as individuals. If you deal with them en masse, they're generally mad. But if you have if you deal with them individuals, they're sensible and intelligent, and they can understand what it takes to help everybody else. But I think I said right at one of the start of this pandemic, hang on a minute before I get to that, Tina, I'm happy with more restrictions if needed. It certainly is. I work in a hospital and I've seen more cases in the last couple of weeks. So there is something coming. And of course, although we've got more infections now, mortality tends to come a few weeks later. So that's what they're waiting to see, I think, is the statistics on how hospitals cope with the wave they've got. And I said at the start of this pandemic that you'd be better off using your common sense than listening to this lot, because they're idiots. Now, on the bottom, it's always to listen to scientists and not politicians, because the politicians are only going to say what's going to make you feel good at the time that they're saying it. And on the side of page 6, on Ben's spread on COVID, there is a piece about Sir Patrick Vallance, the chief scientific advisor, he of herd immunity fame, who said they're bracing for a winter 4th wave later this year, when the temperatures drop and we all go back indoors again, September, October. Now, Ben, you wrote this one as well. Is he serious?
Yeah, so Patrick was taking part in a briefing over the weekend here in Cornwall, where the G7 summit has been taking place. He briefed G7 leaders on the vaccine programme in Britain and how the coronavirus has been playing out here. And later he did a briefing for journalists where we asked him, about what's coming up in the next few months. And he said that they're expecting more pressure from coronavirus as the winter goes on. We know that coronavirus is worse in winter because we spend more time inside because it's so cold. And obviously with the temperatures going down as the year goes on into November and December, they are expecting that more people will be inside, more will be still mixing indoors, and those are the perfect conditions for coronavirus to spread. So yeah, Sir Patrick was quite blunt really in warning that of an increase as the sort of 2021 draws to a close. And this morning, Sir Mark Walport, who's Sir Patrick's predecessor as chief scientific advisor for England, he said, we are now at the start of a 3rd wave with the Indian variant, and this is the summer now. You can see behind me the beautiful Cornish weather, like it's really warm, blue skies. This is it. We're outdoors, and cases are going up. When we go back inside again, all of us will be vaccinated, but they are expecting again cases to go back up.
And the reason partly they're expecting it is because there will be continued variants. And as Mike says there, will the latest extended lockdown change the rules on international travel, on borders, on controls? Because that's how we got the Boris Johnson variant in the first place, was because millions of people came in from a part of the world that had a high infection rate with a new variant circulating in it. Did he say anything about whether this predicted 4th wave is something they can predict because they know the borders are going to be open?
He didn't. He wasn't asked about the element of frontiers. I mean, the Indian variant, obviously, Britain put India on the red list on April the 23rd, on St George's Day, which was a little bit later than a lot of people thought he should have gone on the red list. You remember at the time Boris Johnson was planning to go to Delhi to meet the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and there was a lot of suspicion, albeit it was denied by Downing Street, that the reason the government wasn't placing India on the red list sooner was because he didn't want to upset Narendra Modi. And of course, we're hoping to get a trade deal with India at some point. And I should say that Number 10 furiously denied that as the reason. So India is India is on the red list now, but it's still allowing direct flights between the United Kingdom and a few Indian cities. As you know, Susan, I'm a bit of a plane geek, and every now and then I look at the arrivals from places like Delhi and Mumbai, and there's still a flight a day coming in. That hasn't stopped. So the government insists, obviously they've got strict quarantine procedures for people coming from red list countries. You remember they've got to go to a government approved hotel for 10 nights, spend £1,750 of their own money, and they've got to show several positive tests before they can leave that quarantine. But something obviously went wrong. There's 96% of the cases that we now have in Britain are thought to be the Indian variant. So something went wrong. Labour obviously going on the attack about that, and it is. I think Boris Johnson is vulnerable to the charge that he shut the border again. Well, he hasn't shut the border, but put India on the red list too late, and allowed the Indian variant to slip into Britain. And if that's the 96% of cases we've got now, well, then that can be laid at the Prime Minister's door.
Yeah, and of course, you know, like Siobhan says there, why haven't we stopped travel? Be more like Australia and New Zealand. They closed their borders and they handled it really well. Limit people coming in, bring it here into a better control of it. Their economies are doing better as well because they closed the borders. I keep asking you your questions, everybody. How are you going to manage if there is another shutdown? Woody there is saying mental health doesn't get a mention again. There are a lot of people who haven't done too well with some of the restrictions we've had and been cut off from their loved ones, friends, family, care homes, not being able to see residents, not being able to see their families and so on. How are you going to manage if there is a continued set of restrictions, or if perhaps we're going to get harder, tougher restrictions again next winter? Let us know what you think. Get into the comments and let us know. Now, there is a little piece as well in the paper there, Ben, I think I saw it today somewhere, that Marcus Fish, who's an MP, says he won't be obeying any rules after June the 21st. And there are several headbangers on Twitter who would agree with him. And they just are not going to wear masks, not going to social distance. Stuff it. It's Freedom Day. I'm off. I'm out. I'm double jabbed. I don't care. And it'll be interesting to see how the police handle that one. Now, like you said earlier on, they thought that the British public wouldn't put up with restrictions for more than a couple of months, so they delayed it. We've actually obeyed these restrictions and are happy to continue doing so as a majority of us for at least a year and a half so far. But if this carries on, what do they do if there is an increasing number of us who are becoming disobedient, who go, oh, don't care anymore, whatever, let's get over it, and we all get too tired? How could they can't arrest everybody. How could they possibly deal with it?
Well, if you remember, when Boris Johnson announced the roadmap, as he calls it, earlier this year, he said that each stage would be cautious but irreversible. So the idea is that they might take longer to trigger each stage, as we've been talking about delaying the triggering of stage 4 tonight. But what they won't do is take back restrictions that they've already released. So certainly in the near term, they won't be stopping you. They won't be shutting the pubs again. They're not going to do that anytime soon. The idea is it's irreversible. Now, obviously, if there's a huge surge in cases in the winter, and Patrick Vallance wasn't saying a huge surge, he said more pressure from coronavirus. But if there is, then of course they might need to look at new restrictions. But so far, the plan is for the relaxations to be cautious but irreversible. So they won't start reimposing, particularly over the summer, curbs that they've already unlocked, if you like. And you should bear in mind that, like, we can do quite a lot at the moment. All right, it's not, no one's saying things are back to normal, and you certainly can't just jump on a plane and go abroad and have fun for a weekend in Barcelona or whatever, and then come back and go back
to
work.
You can if you're a millionaire.
Well, you still have to go into quarantine. You still have to self-isolate if you're coming back from Spain.
Even if you're a millionaire. Self-isolate in a boathouse, you know?
Well, I wouldn't mind self-isolating where I am now, to be honest. I'll come back to London in this morning. But
some people can manage it.
The restrictions that are still in place, and at the moment, you can't have more than 30 people at a wedding. Now, there's a possibility that tonight, Boris Johnson might relax that element of the restriction. So he won't say yes to all of stage 4, but he could say that people who've got weddings booked and book them, you know, assuming that June the 21st would go ahead, or the relaxation on June the 21st would go ahead as planned, they might still be able to have 50, 60, 70 guests, so many people they've invited at their wedding. We're waiting to see on that, and we probably won't know until about 6 p.m. when the Prime Minister takes to his feet at the podium in Downing Street. But that is one of those things that the government is acutely aware of, is affecting people. People have booked thinking that June the 21st is going to crack on, and they don't want to upset more people. Obviously, nightclubs are highly likely to stay shut. That element, I don't think, will be. That won't be one of the stage 4 things that is allowed to go ahead regardless. But, you know, you can go to the pub with a fair few friends. You can go and see your family in any part of the United Kingdom. You can go and meet up with 30 people outside. There's a lot that we can do. You know, it's ridiculous saying, you know, we can do all this. These are things we took for granted 18 months ago, but they weren't things we were taking for granted 16 months ago. You know, when we were all shutting our houses, 14 months ago, when we were all shutting our houses. So we can do quite a lot. There's more, obviously, we want to do, and it's no consolation to the people who run a nightclub. It's no consolation to anyone who works in the aviation industry and has been on furlough for the past 15 months and is worried about their jobs. But if you're not in those, you can do a fair bit.
Exactly. Now, as Titus is there, I think by winter, most adults would have had both jabs if they all get them done by July. The difficulty is, Tyler, I think that we don't know yet what effect both jabs have on infections and hospitalizations for the Delta variant. We do think that it causes less mortality, much lower rates of mortality, but of course the jab isn't effective for everybody. So some people are still going to go to hospital if they get the Delta variant. And Tracy says, are we going on another lockdown again? We're meant to come off by the 21st of June. Welcome to the party, Tracy. We've been discussing this for the last 20 minutes now. Should have been here earlier. Lastminute.com. Yes, we are. Not another lockdown, but it does mean that the 21st of June is delayed for a month. So we still have a lot of things we can do, but it's not quite as free and fancy free as we thought it was going to be. And Melanie says, what about the people that go on holiday and then don't self-isolate? Ben, you've mentioned nightclubs, which of course have had a terrible time for the past year and a half. And which, you've got mostly young people in there and in closed space, sweating and breathing on each other and doing other things on each other as well. Obviously, it's not great for the transmission of any kind of virus. I imagine her year off as well. But at the bottom of page 6, there's some stuff there about shielding care workers and that they get less than they should be getting to self-isolate. Only half of them, care workers, people who work in care homes, only half of them got full pay. And of the rest, 11% got nothing at all, got no pay for having to self-isolate at home if they've got symptoms, because they're choosing, and so they end up going to work because they're choosing between that or paying the rent. Now, we're a year and a half in. We've got nightclubs that are suffering. We've got other people that are suffering. We've got care workers not being isolating properly. How long is it going to take them to figure out that you have to pay people to isolate properly to control this pandemic? Are they ever going to get to this? I know Matt Hancock's been talking about more payments, but Rishi Sunak has said no. Surely they're going to have to do it at some point.
So this is a study by the Unison Union, and they found that some carers aren't receiving full pay from their care home bosses, when they should be self-isolating. Now, because obviously carers are among the lowest paid people in any industry, a lot of them are on minimum wage, so they need the money. Some of them, it was even some who have quite strong symptoms of coronavirus, should be self-isolating, but some of them feel under pressure from their bosses to go to work. A lot of them feel under pressure from the fact they need to afford to be able to eat, pay their rent, to go into work. So yeah, Unison's calling for full pay for everyone in the care industry who's forced to self-isolate as a result of coronavirus. And the government has said, they are doing more. The government response isn't in that story because it came through very late last night. So that's the Department of Health and Social Care's fault. But if you want to see it, it is online, but not in the paper. So that'll be a lesson to the DHSC that if you say you're going to send someone something by 4 o'clock, then you should. But yeah, so the serious point is the carers, they need to be paid more to stay at home, because if they go to work and they give someone coronavirus, well, then more people are going to be off work for longer, before you get to the fact that you're going to infect more people, and ultimately some people could die. Although obviously people who live in care homes are among the very first. They literally were in the first cohort of people to be vaccinated, so they will have been double jabbed, the vast majority of them. Just going back to what you were saying about the effectiveness of the vaccines. So the Indian variant, the vaccines are slightly less effective against the Indian variant. The first dose is a fair bit less effective, but the government is saying that's why it's so important to have your second dose, because that does seem to show a fairly strong protection against even the Indian or the Delta strain of COVID-19. So if you haven't had your second jab, then and you're eligible for it, if you're due for it, then you really should be getting it, not just for yourself, but for the rest of us.
Exactly. I had my second jab last week. I feel fine. No symptoms either, unlike the first one. And if you're watching Rishi Sunak, stop giving billions of taxpayer pounds to people's mates and start giving it to people who have to self-isolate. Thank you very much. Love the British public. Now, I want to move on to a second story, because there's lots of suggestions today, and in the Mirror Politics newsletter, actually, this morning, which you should all sign up to, that this whole restrictions thing has kind of been ramped up a bit by Boris Johnson as cover for the, oh no, sorry, the other way around. The Brexit sausage wars, there are suggestions that that has been ramped up as cover for the June the 21st restrictions bad news at the G7. So there's growing rumblings of a sausage war along the Northern Irish border. Now, both EU leaders and Boris Johnson were harumphing about this all weekend, Ben. And the deadline for an agreement on this is actually only a few weeks away. So what are the chances of mustard at dawn? Are they going to resolve it?
Boris Johnson's, the ultimate optimist. He said yesterday at the press conference at Cardiff, Spain, Cornwall, at the end of the G7 summit, we will fix it. But as ever with this Prime Minister, you don't get any detail as to how. Like, this is literally something he signed up for back in December. And, when there's something really difficult and, you just want to get it done and eventually get worn down and you just want to, I don't know, for example, get Brexit done, and you don't want to have to deal with all the tricky stuff about what about the border on Northern Ireland that everyone's been banging on about literally 5 years since the Brexit campaign. Just go, oh, yeah, all right, we'll sort it out later. So he signs up to it, and later is the end of this month. That is when checks are due to come in on products going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. The idea being there's now a sea border, trade border, customs border down the Irish Sea. So the free flow of goods between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland can continue. That's a 310-mile frontier between Northern Ireland and the Republic. That, of course, is the United Kingdom's only land border with the European Union. So to stop us basically smuggling goods into the EU decided, with Boris Johnson's acquiescence, indeed he agreed to this, that there would be checks on products going from mainland Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Now, one of the things that's due to be banned is chilled meats, sausages. So sausages from Great Britain aren't supposed to be going to Northern Ireland after the end of this month. Obviously, that's a disgrace, as a cabinet minister would say. And it does constitutionally raise a very important issue of, like, hang on, we're part of the same country. Why can't I send a sausage from, the idea being, from Manchester to Leeds? They're part of the same United Kingdom. Why can't I send a sausage from Holyhead in North Wales over to Belfast? That's the idea. So anyway, this has dominated, particularly day 2 and 3 of the G7 in Cornwall. Boris Johnson wanted to show unity amongst the G7 leaders on vaccines, on climate change, on cutting carbon emissions, and always this undercurrent of, yeah, but what about Brexit, like the Northern Ireland Protocol that you signed up to? That was always playing in the background. And Emmanuel Macron, the briefing around this has been quite interesting. Like, he supposedly said that it's not the same because Northern Ireland isn't part of the UK. Précis, but it was words to that effect, according to some people on the UK side. He said he didn't say it like that. Whatever, a massive row blew up. Macron yesterday called on Boris Johnson in his closing press conference at the G7 to stay calm. Boris Johnson said, they're in complete harmony on the issue. Well, that's obviously not true. You just have to look at the on-record briefings around this. But the fact is, like, Boris Johnson's, he's on his way. He's probably in NATO in Brussels now, if not, he's certainly on his way, because there's a big NATO summit. So all these people who've been in G7 over the past 3 days, apart from the Japanese Prime Minister, they're all now in Brussels having arguments, or probably actually not having that many arguments because they're fairly united in discussing the threat from Russia and the growing threat from China around cyber and other issues. But there is still this thing, the Northern Ireland Protocol, that still needs sorting out. And, we're just over 2.5 weeks away now. So at some point, and the Prime Minister, no one's denying he hasn't got a very tough job. You've got the NATO summit today, you've got dealing with coronavirus the whole way through. Then you've got this huge issue about the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the United Kingdom. This is something that has really got to be at least second in his intro after coronavirus from tomorrow morning. He needs to sort this out.
Yeah, and of course all of this is a result of the things that Boris Johnson wanted a couple of years ago. So, this is the consequences of being Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson. Now, keep asking us your questions. How are you going to manage if there is any more lockdowns next winter? Are you all right with restrictions being held over for a bit longer? Let us know. We'll have a mop-up of the questions and the comments at the end of this. But first, there is some good news. And here it comes. Ta-da! Free TV licenses back. Whoop-de-doo. Except, now, a few years ago, the Tory government persuaded the BBC to take on responsibility for funding free TV licenses for the over 75, which, because there are so many millions of them, effectively meant it was going to be a cut because the BBC couldn't afford to pay the bill. But now a Labour peer is going to introduce a private member's bill to give Granny back her licence, make it law. Now, Ben, I don't know the chances of this being actually made law if it starts in the House of Lords and is only done independently and isn't part of a party political manifesto. But wouldn't it be great if one of these stupid budget shuffling, blame game disputes that we seem to have had for about a decade now could actually be brought to an end? Wouldn't it just resolve so much if they could just give them back?
Yeah, so I've covered this story for about 3 years now with the TV licenses, and the latest development is that Labour peer George Fuchs, he chairs Parliament's all-party group, the cross-party group on ageing and older people, he has got a private members bill which is going into the Lords on Wednesday. Now, if his private members bill succeeds, that's a very big if, and I should say it's quite unlikely. But if it did, it would force the government to take back responsibility for funding the free TV licenses for over 75s. Now, private members' bills usually only succeed if they have government support, because the government has to make time for it, and of course, then the government has a majority of the Commons, albeit it's introduced in Lords, so the government would be able to stop it if it came to the Commons. But what this really does is highlight once again how the government promised in its manifesto in 2017 to carry on with the free TV licenses for over 75s. Now, the history to this is, well, that's fine, apart from in 2015 when George Osborne was Chancellor. Here in the BBC, as part of Charter renewal, they agreed that the BBC would take on responsibility for over 75s free TV licenses. What they disagree on is whether or not the BBC said they would carry on funding it. It's £745 million a year for several million pensioners. It's currently worth £159 a year because that's the cost of the TV licence. Now, back in August, when the BBC introduced means testing, it meant around 3.7 million over 75s lost their free TV licences. So they're now forced to pay £159 a year to watch the EastEnders, Strictly, and everything else on the BBC, which some might say is a good value for money. But the point is, they understood from the government in 2017 that free TV licenses would continue. Realistically, they probably don't care who pays for it as long as it's not them. Now, this blame game has been going on between the BBC and the government. Government says, well, it's the BBC's responsibility because that's what they signed up to in 2015. BBC says, well, no, the government told us it was stopping it for over 75s. It's a bit of an ugly impasse, really, and it doesn't help the 3.7 million people who've lost £159 a year, effectively. George Fuchs, the Labour Lord, he wants to try and change that, and he's been a staunch campaigner on this, and this is the latest in his campaign to try and highlight the betrayal, as he sees it, of the Conservatives by promising in the 2017 manifesto that free TV licences would stay, only for August 2020 them to be withdrawn.
Yeah. When they can find £750 million down the back of the sofa, which currently has been raided for every other penny that's knocking around. That would be interesting. Now, Sharon says, why is everyone adverse to social distancing, wearing masks? Oh, everyone advised, to social distance and wear masks, but the elite are able to mingle at the G7 summit. Does COVID bypass politics or rich gatherings? Now, I understand, Ben, they were getting tested every single day for COVID. Are they all double jabbed as well? Is that part of why they did it?
It wasn't just them who was getting tested every day for coronavirus. All of us had to test every day for coronavirus. That was part of the deal for having your pass and getting admission to, in our case, the media centre. But there are very strict rules around it. Like, from a personal point of view, you had to do your tests, and I hadn't done one before coming down here. And they're pretty minging. The thing you've got to stick at the back of your throat and then up your nose is horrible. Anyway, we had to do those half an hour before we could leave our hotel rooms each morning, and then spend 5 minutes logging onto the website, reporting. Then you have to have the text message or email saying you've tested negative. That allows us then to go to the media centre. They check your, I've been to loads of these summits. They always check your pass, scan you in. Sometimes they check your bag. Here, they checked your pass, scanned you in, and you have to show your positive test. A colleague of mine at a different media organisation, they hadn't got their result. And they got carted off to a separate area and had to do another test. and they had to wait half an hour before they could be allowed in. So there were strict rules around it. The picture that I think I've forgotten her name, I'm afraid, but was it Tracy? I think whoever she. The picture she's referring to is some sort of long lens footage of the barbecue at G7 at Carbis Bay on the Saturday night, and it appeared to show more than 30 people, which is the number you're allowed to mix outside, close together, gathering around chatting. Now, when it was put to number 10, that was this breaking social distancing, they insisted it didn't break social distancing rules. Now, they also said it's outdoors is safer. There's a strict daily testing regime, right? So outdoors is safer, we know that. There is a strict daily testing regime. I know because I'm part of it. There's also an exemption for work gatherings of more than 30 people. Now,
it might have
looked like they were having fun. I'm sure for a lot of them it wasn't fun.
That was fine.
But it was a barbecue on the beach at sunset, beautiful weather. And also, number 10 specifically denied that there were more than 30 people there. What I wasn't clear about, and I'm still not, to be honest, is whether that 30 people includes like the security staff, because the US president was there, that's a lot of security staff, and other premiers, prime ministers, presidents, their security staff, plus all the waiting staff from the hotel and who was brought in to cater for the meal. So there probably were more than 30 people there. I think one of my colleagues counted about 40.
Even if it's
it doesn't
allowed.
Look good. It's the leading by example element, yeah.
Yeah, there is that. And if they can do it and go to a restaurant or be outside in the open, then why can't 60 of us, if we're tested or jabbed, why can't we go and do it? Rules for one and rules for another doesn't work, as Dominic Cummings has proved. Now, Robin, you are referring, I am informed, to an anti-vaxxer in the comments. Who's called Sarah, I assume. I think you've got it the wrong way around. The warriors are the ones who've had the jab, despite the risks, so we can get out of this mess. People like you are the reason we've still got restrictions. Well done, Robin, and thank you everyone in the comments who are taking on the anti-vaxxers for me, because I don't feel like doing it today. I'm too annoyed with them. But yes, while we've got a government that isn't closing the borders, that is letting in dangerous variants, that isn't doing surge vaccinations for the 18 to 25s, as someone was suggesting earlier on in the comments, then we do have to rely on the fact that we're protecting each other. And I've got friends who's having cancer treatment. I've got friends who are unable to be vaccinated because they're too young. I've got lots of who perhaps have some conditions. There are children with asthma and stuff like that. And the fact that if other people are getting vaccinated is how the herd, strong, forms a circle around the weak. That's your herd immunity. Just as we had with the footballer had a heart attack at the weekend. It's just like that. Form a circle around someone on the pitch while they're being cared for. Now, Melanie says, I prefer restrictions to be kept because it means life is manageable. Lockdown I probably wouldn't cope with. I live on my own. No garden, and I've now lost my job after 24 years. Melanie, you've had a bit of a crap year. But if you do live on your own, you're a lone adult in a household, as I am, you can bubble with another household, any household. Member of your family, next door neighbour, someone else in the same situation as you. You don't have to be on your own. Please try and bubble if you can, if we do have to have another lockdown next winter. Which hopefully Boris Johnson will become more sensible as we head into autumn and a fourth wave. And all these problems will be resolved. We'll have no more banger wars. Northern Ireland can have its sausages. And we'll all have the borders closed. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Let's look forward to that. And I shall see you all again. Not you, Ben, but someone else. Everyone else, I'll see you again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Thanks for popping in, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.